All set.
It is 6:01 on Wednesday, March 3rd. Budget hearing, we never were out of session, so this will be the budget hearing that we have for the Board of Finance for the town of Madison. What I like to focus on tonight is basically the revenue. Last time we did expenses, this time I like to do revenue. Be clear, there's really, unless someone's invited to speak, this is just a budget session, so there's no public speaking unless someone from the board would like to allow some town or department to speak. With that being said, would anybody like to say, if you want to just take a second to go through these numbers for us?
Sure, what do you want me to do?
Basically, I want to talk a little bit. No, does it make sense?
I said make it.
What I sent
Well,
out
I want to
today?
go through a little bit about the.
What do you want to do?
I don't know what I have is exactly. Well, the fund balance, I wanted to go through.
Revenue.
Yeah, the revenue. I want to do the revenue, Stacy, yes, and I want to do the historical revenue on the.
Okay, so the three items that I emailed them.
Yes, please.
Sure, and then I want to do the average interest that we earn on the fund.
Okay,
Please.
so I emailed three items. One was, look at this one that looks like this. Very small, too, I'm sorry.
Yep, got it.
Yeah, well, John made me break my printer today because my paper cut, so I had to get.
That's been the whole problem. I made it wait.
Okay, so if you look on this is just history on state revenue. This was one of the attachments today. And you can see the big item that we have been talking about was including ECS, accounting for that in the mill rate calculation. So I want to give you the history.
That's the fourth line item down on the revenue,
ECS.
BCS.
Yep.
Just pointing that out.
So if you look in fiscal year 15-16, that was the last year that we got $1.5 million. That was the last year that we actually got that much money. In 16-17, it dropped down to 400,000. You see that?
Right,
Yeah.
it's a significant drop from fiscal 15 to fiscal 16. Excuse me, fiscal 16 to fiscal 17. About
And then
$1
I
million.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to show you that since 16-17, we have been getting $400,000 for ECS funds. So if we are, if we do want to account for that money in this upcoming budget, I think it's reasonable. We have consistently got in 400,000 since then.
I think when we started to wean off of this, correct me if I'm wrong, it was because we kept looking at it going dwindling and we just didn't want to be dependent on the state. We thought this was a more prudent way to budget.
We were getting
Yeah.
signals from the state
It
that
was that year where everything, it was like they cut us off on a lot. They were threatening the teachers' retirement was gonna come to the
Yeah.
towns. Like there was a lot going on at the state level that year. And that's the year where we said, okay, let's not even count on state anymore. So we stopped. But you can see historically, after that year, we have been getting the 400,000. So I think it's safe to at least count on that 400,000 for this upcoming year.
I think the history has shown, I'm okay with counting that revenue for that amount. I think what happened, what Gene said, we went from 1.5 to 400,000. That's a drastic drop. But the history is pretty much average. And what do you budget for this year? Was it 400?
When we were talking, we got a summary from CCM and it was 390,000. So that's what I was planning on using.
Does anybody on the Board of Finance have any issues with that? I mean, the history is there. We can never completely know what the state's gonna do, but it's not, you're not over budget, and I'm okay with that.
So, John,
Yes,
for the new people,
Yes.
can you just kind of explain the background? Yes.
It's education cost sharing, I'm sorry. So yes, the ECS was money that was received from the state for education cost sharing. At the time, in different towns, it significantly more, cities, I would say, than smaller towns. I don't know what they need. What happens sometimes, and I know it happened during the financial crisis, the state, they give you an estimate, so they can adjust it if they want. That's where the caution came in a few years back when they adjusted from $1.5 million. I'm saying adjustment because I'm being nice, to 400,000, but that's what it's for. It's an education caution and help to Board of Education with the budget. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And just to clarify what we're doing differently this year, instead of just putting that money in the general fund, we are going to allocate it within the budget.
You're counting as
Operational
revenue.
budget.
You're recognizing the revenue, sorry, Stacy, you recognize the revenue, which you haven't done in the last 3 years, or at least since 2000, fiscal 17, you have not recognized the revenue because it was cut, but I think the history's showing 400,000. Even in the year they cut it drastically, you still receive 400,000. So you're recognizing the revenue this year, so as opposed to just having the money come in and being a little
Which
bit.
helps the mill rate.
Yeah, so we stopped budgeting for the revenue. So normally the revenue offsets your expenditure budget. But back then we said, okay, we're not counting on the state anymore, so we didn't budget for the 400,000. But you can see we historically have gotten in the 400,000. So now we're saying in this upcoming budget, maybe it's time to budget to help with the mill rate for this 400,000.
And I will say this, most towns or cities recognize these.
Yeah.
Sometimes they undercut it a little, they most do, right? Because you don't know, but it's a pretty safe bet. I do, so, go ahead.
When the money comes in, Katie, did you say it does not go into the general fund?
I want to back up before you get to that.
Okay.
So the money comes in,
I'm just
everything,
trying to
all the money that comes in goes to the general.
That's
Right,
right.
and it's allocated how, you know.
Yeah.
But we're recognizing the revenue. What we haven't done in the past is not recognize the
Budget.
revenue. We have not, excuse me, we have not budgeted the revenue, so we just,
It was
Extra.
it was
It's a
nice,
windfall.
extra
Money.
400,000. Now we're gonna count on it.
now it's gonna be, help with the mill rate. It's gonna be in the budget, it's gonna be counted. So if we could stay right there.
Yeah.
Stacy, I noticed in municipal revenue sharing, that's hot and cold. Did you budget for that this year or?
That we have not, so we stopped that. That has been kind of all over the place. It was a municipal revenue share. Before that, it was municipal stabilization. So I don't feel comfortable counting on that yet. It's kind of been up and down and reallocated to different pots, so that we are still not going to count on.
And the history there for last year was, the money did come in, we didn't budget for it, we did not put it in the budget, right? We're not, I
Correct.
agree with not doing it, because that's a little more, fluctuates a little bit more, trying to be.
Right, yeah. So the thought was to not count on that yet, but the ECS, I think, is a safe bet that we will be doing that.
And you recognize the pilot money, that's gonna be similar to, pilots paying a little taxes for low for people from capital. Anybody have any questions on ECS or municipal money or pilot?
So along those lines, John, if you look at this next handout or attachment to your email, this shows what we budgeted in the actual, and you can see, to John's point, like the pilot money, we have budgeted. So we're counting on that. So the middle of this first page, you can see all the grants that we budget for and what we've actually gotten in. And if you look at the ECS, we have not budgeted for it, but we've gotten in the 400,000. But if you look at the stabilization grant and the municipal revenue sharing, we didn't budget, we got some in, and then it moved over from one to the other. But the pilot money, and that is payment in lieu of taxes, is second. We do budget for that, and we do get that in as well. And that's like Hammond Asset, it's payment in lieu of taxes. So we do count on that. But this kind of is a summary in a different,
Your budget versus actual, pretty close.
yeah.
The private schools, do we cover that completely with this money? We don't have to supplement it, right?
We do. There is a line item in the budget for private schools. That's to help with the,
You're right, right. Which we're required by law.
And then you have your fees and your building department, building
Yeah.
permit fees and all of that.
So if you look at that, that's the bottom part of the first page. We have increased, like if you go to the building department, the budget in, say, 1920 was 450,000. Now the budget is 500,000 based on history. We had a peak year in 21, 22 because of COVID, all the building permits, but that was a one-time spike.
Did we up the cost of
The
them?
fees, I believe we did, yeah, a little bit. Yep,
So last year, fiscal 23, you budgeted 500, you told me 582, right?
correct. And I believe we left the building at the same for this upcoming, we did. Here.
Anything else change here?
Not
Fees went up,
really.
increased, or-
Not in the licenses fees.
Does anybody have any questions on the grants or the? Just for the audience, this budget session is what I've asked, the last time we did expenses, this time is, and no action will be taken, last time, probably none will be taken, time solely on the revenue. Good.
Yeah, so, question, Stacy, so with youth services, it looks like the actual versus the budget has been more historically.
Mhm.
What's, and so, so how are we gonna, how do you wanna look at that going forward?
So also in the youth services
So
act.
that's the last item on the page, sorry.
Yeah.
That, did up to 100. So that includes 2 state grants as well that we're not relying on anymore. Could we talk about maybe starting to rely on it? Sure. It wasn't a move that we were looking at to make for next year. So there are 2 state grants in that line item, as well as fees that they charge, and we did increase the revenue in this upcoming budget to 100,000. So we bumped it up a little bit.
You went from 85 to 100.
Thank you.
Right.
So then the big item, and this is the third handout that we were gonna talk about, was the interest. So if you go back to the top of that page, you'll see under interest income, the interest on temporary investments. You can see that in 21, 22, we budgeted 205,000, we got in 400. But then in 22, 23, because of everything going on, we had dropped the budget and we actually got in 1.88. And then in 23, 24, we
Yes,
budgeted.
I, for some reason, I have a separate sheet here.
Yep, I was gonna, yep, there was a separate sheet, we can go to that one, it's probably easier, I just wanted you to know it's
Okay,
all on
alright.
this sheet as well,
Gotcha.
but there
Right,
is a
it's
third sheet.
Oh, sorry.
John broke that.
That's right.
How's that paper cut?
I heard that.
I was focusing on
I
the
have-
nameplates.
So you have it?
Yeah. But
Yes.
I know, I'm sorry. I didn't know if it would, do you have that?
Which one?
I'll share.
This one,
Oh, this was the one we were gonna share, remember?
right,
You want to share with me?
no,
Can we get a
that-
quick extension on it?
Yes, yes. I'll just handwrite everything back.
Go
It might
ahead.
be
I'm
user
sorry.
error.
Continue. I interrupted.
Okay, no, that's a great point. So I did do a third attachment. You should all have a copy of it. I'm showing you the history of what we've gotten in for interest over the last 3 years, as well as the budget. So we have been under budgeting quite a bit. In 22, we over budgeted. We budgeted 585. We only got in 400,000. However, in 22, 23, the rates spiked to 3.65%. We budgeted 200,000 and we got in 1.8 million. And then in 23, 24, this current fiscal year, all we did was budget 272,000. If we annualize what we've gotten in so far, it's about 2.7 million. So the thought was, John and I went back and forth a few times of, let's look at the 3-year average, see what it looks like. We know the rates are at an all-time high. They probably will go down next year, but if we look at the 3-year average, it's about 1.8 $6 million. So we thought it was safe to bump that up to 1.6 in order to calculate the mill rate and have a budget offset of 1.6 million.
Right, so, but, yeah,
I just, for people listening or watching, the idea what we're doing now is just right sizing expectations so that we can help the mill rate in the end. So we've been cautious, but this year we feel we can be more accurate based on historical data, and that's why we're changing everything.
well said.
Thank you.
But even with the ECS money, the history's there, even, you know, and there's still some things we're not recognizing because we're not sure, you know, the municipal stabilization grant. But on this revenue, obviously she didn't take 1 year or two, we did, that's where she got the paper cut, because we were going back and forth on a 3-year average. I feel comfortable with that, I mean, it's a 3-year average, do I think rates are gonna stay up here? You know, people talk about historical averages, well, they're probably not that much higher than they were, it's just that they were so low when the financial crisis came for so long, people got used to 1%. It's really, the average is probably around 5 or 6, right? Give or take. So do I think rates will come down a little? Yes, but I don't think they're gonna be below 4. And that's where the 3-year average works. So you have the 1.6 million. And if you think about it in light of, it looks like we're gonna collect 2.7, right? And we budgeted 2, we'll use round numbers if that's a right team. We you know, we budgeted 2.7 just this once. That's a $2.5 million pickup there. So even if we use 1.6 of the revenue, which is the 3-year average, and we use some of the principal, your fund balance, it still looks like, right now, it looks like it'll still grow. But we want to be cautious to Gene's point. So go ahead.
I think to Gene's point too, for anyone listening in, it's like you have to balance, right? So we'll want to be more accurate so that mill rate can make the mill rate more accurate, reflective. But even if we get this wrong, right, we're still safe. We're still safe.
Right, well, that's why you
Yeah.
want,
Yeah.
that's why Stacy had the history of the ECS one, she went back, you know, 5, 6, 7 years. So to answer your question, if we get it wrong, you're still safe,
Yeah.
right? And I've been, and I don't think I'm the only one, there's a lot of talk about spend all the fund balance. I think that's not the prudent thing to do, but if we can use the revenue off the fund balance and show the history and do it that way to help with the mill rate, you know, especially going through the 3-year average, I think is
Because you
okay.
look historically at the ways we've used that fund balance over the years, it's a safety net for the town, you know, in nature crisis and financial crisis and
Yeah, you never know. what's
you
gonna
never
happen.
know. And this is just make sure that the town is not going to be exposed
Right.
in a way that's going to hurt the taxpayers.
It's a very good point, because you can have a blizzard, you know, you can have a storm, we've had sometimes hurt people, you know, 2 in a row, and as much as the state, I'm sure I'll get my foot in my mouth here, will reimburse you relatively quickly, it could take 2 or 3 years.
Right.
We've seen that before, or sometimes the formula changes, so you have to be careful. It's nice to have that fund balance, it's really nice to have. I think the prudent thing to do is what, you know, we're doing, is use some of the revenue. But to Matt's point, even if it doesn't go exactly as planned, we're still, you know, safe. Does anybody have a question? What I'm trying to do, just like the last meeting, does anybody have a question or an issue with using the interest of the 3-year average or ECS money? This is about recognizing the revenue we have and going through this.
No, I think that was a worthy exercise. I think it's helpful for me to see it. So thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, Katie, I can't.
Go ahead, Katie.
I said thank you. It's helpful to see it this way.
Yes.
Nothing really meaningful.
Sorry.
Yeah, you know, I don't want someone to look
Nobody
at
ever
this and
said
say,
that.
okay, fiscal 22 is on X. The rates are very low.
I didn't say
Very
that.
Oh, gosh. Makes much more sense.
Anything else on the revenue side that you want to bring up? Does anybody have any other questions on the revenue side? Bob,
I'm good.
Katie,
No, this was super helpful. Thanks.
so you want to briefly talk about the potential impact of the mill rate, or,
Sure. You want me to?
well, we're not there yet, but I think the revenue, I think we budget 1.6 of interest for the fund. We also, did you use a principal, was a $500,000?
Yes, so there's a few things going on with the mill rate here. So one is obviously we're in a reval year. The grand list has.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the ground stuff, I just want,
Yep,
I want to finalize how much we're going to use for the fund balance.
Okay,
So we showed the interest, I just want to show the other, we went through ECS, the only other thing I think of is the principal on the fund balance, so we're gonna use $500,000, is that correct?
that's what's in my calculations right now, and then I did just want to mention, other than the grand list, we improved the senior benefits, so that's gonna have an impact on our mill rate this year. Before we used to do the abatement or the freeze, now people are going to get both, so that's gonna have an impact. We've also, the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Town Meeting approved the Economic Development Tax Incentive Program, so that's gonna have an impact on the mill rate. So that's why John and I really dug deeper, looking at the interest, talking about the fund balance, because there are other items in play this year for the mill rate. And then, yeah, John, when we were running numbers, we talked about 1.6 for interest, we talked about 395 additional for ECS, and then potentially a $500,000 offset of the mill rate for use of fund balance.
Right, so,
Wait, can you say, give me that list again?
yeah, so I want, that's why, I don't want to get into the mill rate yet, I don't think we're ready, we have to go through the expense side, whatever changes happen. But the ECS, which is recognized in the budget, which hasn't been done in the past. And I want to talk briefly about the use of the revenue off our fund balance, which is 1.6, and I know it's semantics, but we're gonna use 500,000 potentially, we can use more, we can use less, it's in the budget, but that 500,000 we're saying is principal, but in reality, we're gonna collect 2.7 this year, yeah,
You guys
So
collect
that-
what?
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
2.7.
I'm sorry. But in
So
reality.
in reality, we're not touching the principal if our fund balance still
Right.
grows. But so there was the 500,000 for,
From the fund
on
balance.
the fund balance.
395 for,
ECS, you had the senior benefits, right? Tax incentive program that was passed.
You see the interest.
The well, interest we talked about, I don't think, the interest from the fund balance. And there are still things that we're not recognizing.
and that gets you to number of what? Potentially?
We don't know. The whole goal is to keep the bill rate
Yeah.
under 2%.
And as you can see, there's a bunch of appeals going on right now. We have 300 going through this month of tax assessment appeals because of the rebound. So we won't know until, they go through the end of the month. So it's very premature to really talk about a grand list.
You can kind of guess, but you don't know.
Yeah, we have an idea where it was, because we have to submit by January 31st to the state, but 300 appeals could change the number.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Okay. Any questions on the revenue, the grant revenue, I said, I know Stacy passed it out before, the tax incentive, senior benefits, anything else? Like I said, mill rate, work on next week, is there anything else on the revenue side? Good. Okay. My intention was just to go through the revenue side, and the next week, go through the whole thing. I know we're not gonna know exactly what will happen until the end of the month. It'll be a guess.
But again, we're always cautious, so we'll be able to observe what we need to.
Even these revenue projections, I think, are still cautious. I know they
Well, the tax collection rate too,
are.
very
It's about
cautious.
tax
That's a
collection.
huge part
I don't want
of the mill rate.
Yeah, we're not touching it. No, we're not touching that. Yeah, so the tax collection rate's another one, we're not gonna touch that. So yes, it looks like we're not, even through awful, we're still okay.
We're still safe. And I think, does the undesignated fund balance affect our bond rating?
It's always a topic.
Yeah,
It's always a topic.
so it's good.
Yeah.
Just
It's healthy, right?
Yeah,
I think you can easily show, even with the 1,600,000 and the 5, you're just using the interest. Easily.
I like that idea. Have we ever done that before, just use interest?
I don't think we've,
Officially,
taken that approach. I think it's a great approach for this year, especially, the rates have they've shown us how
yeah,
off we were. So I think it's a good idea.
I also like using the average. numbers too, because it's not just using one, like we used just this
Exactly.
year now, so we're gonna use 2.7 and it's a nominal.
We took a low year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a really low year.
Yeah, yeah.
Crazy low.
Sure we have.
And it's only gonna get better too. I mean, the way they're presenting it now, we'll see what, how this year shapes up, and next year we can refine those assumptions. So,
Right.
It's one of the reasons why as I've said in the past, feel very strongly about appropriations, because if you're not planning and careful about what we're appropriating and there's not proper planning, then that can get depleted, which affects, as we're hearing, the interest and
And
everything else.
it also can leave a gap in, inflate your budget, and then the following year, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but we're under.
Very cautious.
That's why I like to usually the average for the revenue, things in ECS one, I think you kind of had to recognize at some point you had to. But, all right. Anything else? Meet next week.
I was unable to attend your workshop last week because I was on vacation. I apologize. And I know that that there was discussion about the Board of Ed proposed budget. I didn't know if there's an opportunity for me to address some of that.
So what I said before we started the meeting is obviously this is a workshop. There really is no public session. But I also said if someone, department head or someone asked for the board of finance to come and talk, we'd allow them. We're not going to do anything tonight until you have a question. We're pretty much going to walk out. So if you want to come to the next meeting, if you're here, if you want to say something, as a department head chair, for lack of better terms, I would allow you to say something, sure.
Okay. So meet tonight or the next meeting?
I prefer the next meeting, but since you're here already, Seth, if you want to say your piece, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of would. I prepared a statement because I was a little concerned with the way the discussion went last time. So I just want to kind of straighten out the record. So thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for this opportunity to render public comment or my statement to address some inaccuracies about the Board of Education's budget posture and about my prior statements and actions. At the last Board of Finance budget workshop last week, Jean Fitzgerald went on a screed expressing her concern that the Board of Ed is supposedly intransigent and refusing to work with the town to produce a reasonable budget. Nothing can be further from the truth. To begin, it is important to understand that the Board of Ed is facing a very challenging budget year with an 8.8% increase in health insurance alone and several other cost drivers. The whole state is in the same boat, and the district and the Board of Ed delivered a budget that presents only a 3.41% increase in the operating budget. That is one of the lowest budget increase proposals in the state, yet again, and well below the average along the shoreline and in our district reference group of like districts across the state. The Board of Education voted over a month ago to support that budget because all that money is technically needed to fund the educational programming in light of staff contract and health insurance cost increases and other significant cost drivers. Above and beyond that, after tri-chair leadership meetings with Peggy and John indicated the need to find additional budget savings, I worked in the best of faith with Dr. Cook, with our shared finance director, Stacy, and directly with Peggy and with John Picard to find additional areas where we could creatively move an additional $200,000 off of our budget. There is zero fluff in the BOE budget, but we were able to identify alternate funding sources, creative rollouts of certain projects to save additional funds, and also make a straight cut of $40,000 to the line that will fund our preparation for an unfunded state mandate that will roll out over the next couple of years. It's apparent that John didn't have the opportunity to inform the Board of Finance of just how well the Board of Ed was playing in the sandbox to help meet the Board of Finance's tax target. Contrary to Jean's mean-spirited accusations at the last meeting, the Board of Ed has been working with both other boards all along to bring in an overall budget scenario that will help meet the town's budget and tax goals for the coming year. I was not certain that I could get a revote of the Board of Ed in favor of reducing our town budget our own budget proposal by an additional $200,000. So I indicated that the cut would have to come from the Board of Finance. That said, my board is comfortable with the creative plan that Dr. Cook and I devised with Stacy's assistance to offer creative reductions to help meet the town's tax goals for this coming fiscal year. After I confirmed with members of my board individually that they could support the proposed set of cuts or postponements of the planned spending, I promised John that I would publicly support a $200,000 cut by the Board of Finance. I intend to stand by my word despite this playing out as it has. I will not support a cut above $200,000, nor do I think my board would. Note that I cannot speak on behalf of my board outside a board vote, but having been in touch with folks, I'm aware that they already feel we are being eminently reasonable and responsible to the town and to the taxpayers. And again, I would stress that even at 3.41% operating budget increase, our budget proposal is one of the absolute lowest in the state this year, notwithstanding Jean verbalizing her dismay at the proposal. Cutting an additional $200,000 will make it approach a flat 3%. I urge the Board of Finance to consider that any further cuts beyond that level will unnecessarily incur into educational programming. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. I'm not gonna get into too much of this. I think that, and Jean has no malice. The question that came up was the board specifically asked by Peggy to cut the budget 1%. It was definitively no, that the board wasn't asked. And to go through, whether you can get the board to cut or not cut, that was, basically, in the end, it's a Board of Finance decision, and that's where we are. When Jean made a proposal to cut the Board of Ed by 1%, was in response to just about every other department was asked 1%. There was nothing else we had. And I will tell you, when it first came out, I thought it was 1% of the 60 million, which would have been 600,000. And then to Jean's credit, she said, I want to minus benefits, payroll, debt, right? Go down the list. So it ended up being about 240 cut. So I understand your position. I think there's a lot of what something said interpreted in a meeting is different than what actually happened. There was absolutely no, we're all one city, we're all one town, we're all working together. That's what it was. But it was basically, and I know there was other Board of Finance, well, at least one other Board of Finance member who wanted to cut more than the 240. So it was basically, hey, 1%, and I'm thinking 1% of 60 million is 600,000. That's a pretty significant cut. And Jean, I never got that thought out because she said, I want to minus the health, the benefits entirely, payroll, debt, and that came, I think Stacy, you were there, she asked what would that be, you said roughly about 240. So that's what it was there.
I took no offense whatsoever, nor did I take it as an affront to the Board of Ed when Jean was discussing the percentages and how she got to that 240. What I was concerned about, and you can go back and consult the record, I just watched it this evening, basically talking about the Board of Ed being intransigent, not, working with the other boards in the town, not being sensitive to the town.
I'm not gonna.
That's what I was.
Vice Chair of Board of Finance, I think everything here was done with trying to get to a point where we were, which meant that everybody believes in education. The funniest thing was that the biggest argument we had, which I think lasted about an hour a month ago, was the uniforms. And that night, it would take 30 seconds. Everybody's in agreement. They can't budget. They don't have a revolving fund. So if we can't pay for them via ARPA, we'll find a way to get it done. So that was the most amazing thing in the communication department, which I would laugh because I don't know if I said it to you, but I said to somebody else, I'm not going to spend an hour talking about band uniforms. And I love the band, and that's great. And my kids all play sports, so I think that's a good thing. So that part was out the way. None of this is ever done in malice. None of this is ever done other than trying to do what we think we can do to make things better for the town. I can tell you that without question.
I appreciate all your volunteer work.
Yeah, it's more than that. It's we're trying to do something, and I think some of it is the only other thing you said. I'm not going to get into this. It was basically, hey, I can't go back to my board to cut this, so we have to do it. That's our job, really. That's it. And I understand you're the chair of the Board of Ed. You want to say, hey, this is what we need. I get it. We understand that, but there was zero animosity at all on any of our parts.
And the only thing I will add to that is that I think better communication and more public and open communication. Sounds like a lot of these things happened without everybody's knowledge, and maybe if it is more transparent in the future, that these misunderstandings will happen.
I want to jump in there because we could talk what we want. Nothing can happen without the vote of the board. Nothing can happen with, like you said open, I can't go back to my board and ask for a cut. So that's, if people have conversations that say, do I think we can do this, or maybe we can do that, it happens. But when it comes down to, here's where we are, it's unopened, we talked about, discussed it openly and said, here's what we think we can do. Or whether it goes to 1% of the board, which is 600,000, or someone else wanted 400,000, or nothing, or 2 or 2. It's gonna be a decision made by the board members. I do appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Anything else? We don't adjourn because we just continue this, so
Yeah.
we'll just continue to the next.
Which is when, Tuesday?
Let's look at Stacy.
It's Monday.
Monday. I knew
Monday
that.
night, what time?
Monday.
Totally knew that.
6 o'clock,
6
Of
o'clock.
course, Monday, 6 o'clock.
not 5:30,
Yes.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock in Hannah.